Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Eurofile. Today, I'm here. This is Mo. And Scott, you're here. Hello, Scott. I'd like to welcome everybody because today we're going to be talking about something extremely important. We're focusing on Georgia today in the case of Nika Gvaramia. And I'd also like to talk about how Nika's case is connected with the wider geopolitical situation that we have in hand right now, okay, in Europe, and also, touching a little bit on the war, all right, in Ukraine and Georgia's position in that. Now, we know, just to give a bit of a context to those of us, okay, who don't have, all right, an idea of what Nika's case was all about. Nika was handed a sentence of 3.5 years, right, by the courts. But his case reflects, from my reading, and this is what we're going to get into, it reflects the ongoing attack of the free press in Georgia and also the opposition in Georgia itself. Nika came out in support of Ukraine, okay, and then three months later, there is the arrest and also his court case. In talking about the EU, Nika was very clear from my reading and from his speeches, and he said, Georgia will embark on a path towards the West. None of us can be bought, and we will not take a single step back. And at his trial, he said, I'm not looking for freedom. I'm already a free man. I am seeking justice. Now, to help us get through all of this, I'd like to welcome our distinguished guests today. And first and foremost, Nika's wife, Sophia. Hello, Sophia.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you all for this opportunity and shown interest. I'm very grateful that we're here today discussing my husband's, Nika Gvaramia's case. My husband is a Georgian media manager, the founder, director general, and journalist of Tavari TV channel, and at the same time, a political prisoner. Nika Gvaramia has always been fighting against the pro-Russian regime under the patronage of Bidzina Ivanishvili, the Russian oligarch and illegitimate leader of the current government. Nika Gvaramia's role has always been crucial in keeping up the maintenance of free and independent media. My husband has always been a fearless advocate for democracy in Georgia, along with his family, friends, and Georgian patriots. His priority line is to fight against Russia. His attitude towards Russia is clear from the interview, from which I would like to quote a few sentences to be more precise. So Nika says, Russia is enemy number one. I can also say that it is the only enemy of my country, the only enemy of small, beautiful, rich European Georgia. All the tragic moments in Georgian history are connected with Russia. 1783, the Treaty of Georgievsk, the beginning of a great catastrophe. 1801, the annexation of Georgia. 1921, the annexation of Georgia by Soviet Russia. I see no difference between Russia, Soviet Russia, the Russian Empire, or independent Russia. Russia has never existed outside Tsarism. It is the country of Tsarism, the only state structure that has always functioned in Russia in all periods of history is Tsarism. And that is why the state has no future, because Tsarism cannot have future in the 21st, 22nd, and so on century. The goal of Russia is to interfere because they know that either now or never, Georgia will become either the Krasnodar region or a European state. My country is on the verge of survival.
This is it. This is the crux of it. Scott, did you want to come in with a question?
Just, thank you so much for that statement, for the passion, as well as laying out the information. Just a couple of basic questions for those of us who are kind of new to Nika's case. The sentencing was in May of last year. Were the charges filed? When were the charges filed? Were they before or after the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Thank you, Scott, for the question. It was after invasion, and I will explain why. We often hear that the liberation of Georgia from the oligarchy and the path to the European integration of Georgia is now being decided in Ukraine. Well, Ukraine's victory is now decisive for the entire civilized world. Ukraine's victory is the only large-scale prospect for Georgia, but it cannot happen only at the expense of the Ukrainian heroic people. In Georgia, civil activities supporting Ukraine and the civil movement demanding the implementation of EU recommendations should be strengthened. And in this process, Nika Gvaramia's role is significant. That is also why my husband is imprisoned, and prolonging the process is only the goal of the Russian regime.
So these charges go all the way back a decade, linking the whole question of a free media in Georgia versus political control. But as I understand it, the specific charge that you've described, they built up is from 2019 about the use of the company car. So why make the move from putting pressure on him for a decade and saying, okay, now we're going to put you behind bars? I mean, had his threat increased, or was it just simply the atmosphere of the Russian invasion on top of Russian politics?
Yeah. Was there a trigger? Was there a trigger?
That is a good question. Thank you, Scott. Nika has been targeted by the Russian regime for 10 years. In 2012, after the peaceful transition of power, oligarch came with a declaration of European integration. Mostly, people believed in his promises about making Georgia more democratic based on European values with strong aspirations into the Euro-Atlantic structures. From the very beginning, my husband, Nika, was one of the main public figures who spoke sharply and loudly about oligarchs' shadow businesses and interests. My husband tried to make people understand that instead of so-called philanthropist, Ivanishvili was a Russian oligarch with a good executive habit of fulfilling the Kremlin's plans and actively enhancing Kremlin's propaganda to achieve his main goal, making Georgia more Russian. At first, Nika's arrest was aimed at intimidating the media, while Ivanishvili's regime was taking the first steps. They did not consider it necessary to put Nika in prison. At that time, they diligently hid their true intentions and played European. Now we have a different reality. They employ exactly the same methods at the Kremlin. They intimidate media and the non-governmental sector, attack the public defender, and discredit the democratic forces. They openly condemn and insult the diplomatic corps, international partners, European parliamentarians, and true friends of Georgia. Today, my husband is in prison on an absurd charges with purely political motives. His arrest has been assessed as political persecution by non-governmental organizations in Georgia, the public defender, and international partners. They cannot forgive him for the fact that he has been fearlessly fighting the Russian regime since 2012, and in response, he was arrested for the first time in 2012, also at the head of a free media, and also on the same absurd charge. And now, at the most crucial moment for the country, when the country is in waiting mode for EU membership candidate status, he has been sidelined and locked up in prison. It is precisely my husband's, Nika's, imprisonment, his removal from civil processes, and the complete extinction of Tawari Channel that strengthens the Russian oligarchy and further distances us from the EU membership candidate status and the West.
Yeah, I see that as well here. Okay, not to this extent. Okay, I don't want to say that this is the same thing. But for example, here we're talking about Russian penetration into the political parties, something that Nathalie, and Ina, we've talked about and discussed also in the past. Zelensky was supposed to talk at one of Italy's largest cultural events for 5 minutes to address the audience. It's the largest musical kermesse in Italy and probably one of the largest in Europe. And the pro-Kremlin proxies started a campaign to stop him talking, and they did. So we have a government that says that it is pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine, so on and so forth. But in this regard, they don't stand up, right? They don't stand up for those values that I'm sure Nika has been fighting for so long, right? He was justice minister as well, from my reading.
Well, Georgian government undertakes similar practice. On one hand, tries to make public statements regarding the support of Ukraine. However, on the other hand, in practice, they actually work against Ukraine. For example, they have blocked the charter flight that was planning to take Georgian volunteers to help Ukraine. Government helps Russia to avoid sanctions, attack Ukrainian officials, and so on. And my husband, Nika, was the most vocal person exposing these practices of Georgian government.
Yeah. May I also add? Yeah, you mentioned Ukraine and Zelensky. So I think before Nika's arrest, that period when the war started was very critical because besides all the good watchdog work that Nika and his channel was doing, when war started, Nika was the first one who noticed and who started exposing the Georgian government was not helping Ukraine, was actually working against Ukraine and helping Russia to avoid sanctions. So Nika was and the government started making fun of Zelensky and attacking other Ukrainian officials. They have orchestrated fake Facebook and trolls and bots against Ukraine officials and Zelensky. So what Nika tried was to have at least like one Ukrainian official every single day on Tavari channel. So we would have their presence. We would show Georgian people that we stand by Ukraine. And this is what actually Georgian people really do. I mean, they do stand besides Ukraine, but it was the government who was actually working against Ukraine. Nika and his channel exposed Georgian government. We were the first one back in March when we noticed that Georgian roads were being used to avoid sanctions and to transport the goods to Russia. Only lately now, after a couple of months, New York made quite an intensive article about it. And then we heard CNN's journalist Amanpour asking von der Leyen about the sanctions and about what countries like Georgia they're going to do about who is helping Russia to avoid sanctions. And we were the ones who exposed Georgian government in, transferring sanctioned Russian oil and Iranian oil. We were the ones who exposed that Iranian cargo oil was allegedly carrying kamikaze drones to Moscow by using Georgian airspace. So international media started talking about that, but it is Nika's effort, Nika's commitment, and his team's channel that to show to Georgian people and to the world that what we have been knowing from the early days when this government came, it is vivid now. So world needs to pay attention. So Nika's role is immense and is critical. That's why they have arrested him at this critical point, and the timing of his arrest was intentional. Again, they have been targeting him for 10 years. Well, in the early, years of their power, of course, they demonstrated they were Europeans and pro-democracy, etc. They didn't arrest him, in jail. Nika was arrested just as a pre-detention trial back then, and he was released in 3 days because the judiciary was not run by them in the first months of their power, and he was released and he was acquitted of all the charges. But now when the state is already captured and all pillars are captured of democracy, they arrested him on absurd charges. And again, for 3 years, they have been chasing under these charges against him. They arrested before European Union was going to give us an answer on candidate status.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Before we get into the Russian, penetration and give an idea the extent of it, what kind of relationship they have with the governing party, so on and so forth. Tamta, I wanted to ask you, before we move on, with Nika's defense, what defense are you pursuing? What line of defense are you pursuing?
Well, thank you for this opportunity again. The defense is very simple. There's no crime. We have multiple reports from neutral organizations, including Public Defender's Office, including authoritative NGOs who have studied and examined the whole case of Nika, starting from the day one when the charges were applied by the prosecutor's office, including today when we have two judgments of two instances of the court. They all unanimously say that this case should not be even a criminal case. If there's any questions, it should be under, corporate law, a civil case. So the defense is very simple. We have the truth, and of course, we try to argument it before the court. However, judiciary is very, very heavily concentrated by the corrupt judges. And as you have mentioned, state is captured. We have already have that label by Transparency International Berlin office back in 2019. So all pillars of democracy are already captured. The only pillar of democracy, media, that is kind of still breathing, it's just us, the small critical TV channels, and mainly Tavar, because we're most influential and our voice is being heard. So as I have mentioned, we have two judgments of two instances of the courts, of Tbilisi City Court and the Tbilisi Court of Appeals. Unfortunately, the charges are really absurd, but the judges actually, of course, are biased, and they have the Tbilisi Court of Appeals didn't change Nika's penalty, the judgment and the sanction here they applied against him, and now we're on the way to Supreme Court. However, we don't have any hope there. If there was any hope, we had this on the first and two instances. Now, Supreme Court is more heavily concentrated by obedient judges, and the appointment of those judges were actually very strictly criticized by EU and US high-level institutions, because those appointments were made against our allies' recommendations. And of course, the appointment of those judges were intentional, so that the Supreme Court, the highest body of the judiciary, that can, overturn the judgments of lower courts, is very critical and important for oligarchs. For example, the head of the criminal chamber, Mr. Shalva Tadumadze, that is the head of the criminal panel, so he's overseeing all the criminal judges in the Supreme Court, used to be personal lawyer of oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili. And he was, at the time when prosecutor's office applied charges against Nika in 2019, Shalva Tadumadze was the general prosecutor. So those charges went also under his, supervision. So of course, we know that there shouldn't be any hope regarding Supreme Court, and then we have to go to European Court of Human Rights. However, we also think that this is not a remedy for Nika, because it takes years for European Court of Human Rights to make final decisions, and Nika will be out by that time. So the only hope now is Georgian President Salome Zurabishvili, who has a power and mandate to pardon Nika, just at least for the sake of country, because European Union has defined 12 recommendations for us, and number 7 is specifically about Nika. So it's in her power to do it for the sake of the country. Now, as for specific details of the charges, as Sophia already mentioned, the reason why Nika is arrested is using private company's car for private purposes. So when government took ownership of Rustavi 2 and, then new owners came, they applied, filed a complaint against Nika as if Nika damaged the property of Rustavi 2. And that was implied in using Rustavi 2's car for private purposes. Now, the evidence of it, how Nika used private car for private purposes was a surveillance video presented by the prosecutor's office when Sophia was driving the car, her daughter, and the dog to the park. So these absurd charges, of course, everyone knows it. Even Georgian Dream supporters know how absurd the charges are. Let me tell you more. For 10 years, when Nika decided to go to private sector, when he left the previous government, he went to the United States, he quit government job, then he came back to Georgia, he did his private practice as a lawyer, and then he was appointed as a CEO of Rustavi too. And from day one, when Ivanishvili came to power, Nika was the first one who said that this man who is demonstrating himself as a charity man and a philanthropist actually is not a charity man, but a Putin's proxy in Georgia. And he's going to drive Georgia towards Russia. And he indeed has done it slowly, step by step. So from day one, Nika became the target of Ivanishvili, and for 10 years, Nika personally himself and his team back in Rustavi 2 and now at the Tavari channel, we have been experiencing multiple type of pressures, like verbal, physical attacks, intimidation, blackmailing, surveillance, threatening Nika to upload his private live videos on YouTube, and many things. We have over financial strangles and mechanisms, making law amendments to attack us and to diminish and undermine our financial stability, etc.
Wow.
So during these 10 years, government has also opened multiple cases against Nika, criminal cases. He has been summoned for an absurd cases like for his Facebook posts, for example. They have opened charges against him like for as if Nika wanted to throw the government. So for 10 years, he's been demonized. And after 10 years, they arrested him for using a private company's car for private purposes. So even Georgian Dream supporters know or know how absurd these charges are.
Yeah.
And I have to say and underline that I think this is intentional. This is done intentionally to demonstrate and to give signal to everyone. Yes, we can arrest you for any reason.
Yeah.
We can just make up those reasons. Yes, and we can arrest you for any time, anywhere.
Just walk in, take whatever you have, make your life absolutely a living hell. Make it for your family a living hell. You can't make money. Basically, they destroy you. Exactly. How is this having an effect on other activists in Georgia and other people of the opposition? So this is a cautionary tale. They're holding Nika up and saying, this is what's going to happen to you. Yes. And it's having an effect? It is.
It is, yes. So as Sophia also mentioned, Nika was giving platform to all those who were pro-Western. This was civil society, activists, opposition, politicians, experts, like representatives of society, all types, those who were pro-Western and wanted the country to succeed. So, and the businessmen as well. And after Nika's arrest, the channel also has financial problems because Nika's arrest was a very strong signal to businessmen as well that they shouldn't support pro-Western Tavari channel. So oppositioners as well, they're not active as they used to be. And the temperature of political life in Georgia has been going down and decreasing, and there's no any like protest rallies or just some kind of assemblies that activists and civil society members would come up and be vocal about certain issues that are critical for our country. It is very clear that the Georgian life, political and civic life after Nika's arrest has been decreasing in terms of temperature.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Are you getting enough assistance from either EU parliamentarians? I've heard some of them speak, but is this just they're saying it or are they actually stepping up to help? How can we also help? No?
My husband's case has been raised at high-level institutions of the international allies such as EU Council, EU Commission, EU Parliament, US State Department, US Embassy to Georgia, ministers of EU countries and international media defense organizations, including human rights and media defense organizations, such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Article 19, Reporter Without Borders, CPG, and etc. After my husband's arrest, there emerged an idea that with this action, the Georgian dream looked up not only free speech in prison, but also the Western perspective of Georgia, because the European perspective of Georgia is incompatible with a politically motivated court. Nika, as you mentioned, Monique, said at the trial that he's not looking for freedom. He already has it. He only seeks justice. Along with him, I would say, Georgia is also seeking justice. Justice will be served for my country only when it becomes a member of the European family. My husband, with Georgian people, rely on Europe as an ally in difficult process of seeking justice. Now I have an important mission to do my best to help Nika make his voice heard to you, because you, our international partners, are the only hope and strength for me, my family, my friends, and the honest and patriotic citizens of the country. Help us to find justice and help me with my mission. Help me make Nika's voice heard from prison cell number 212.
This problem, really, I'm thinking back, and here I would like to also bring in Ina and also Nathalie. I'm thinking back in 2008, because this story of Russian penetration, the problems, the way that you have said, right? Georgia needs to be saved because it is part of Europe. It should be part of Europe. That's what the aspiration of its people. It's good for the economy, for the rule of law, for everything that it is part, right? It started back in 2008, this erosion of the rule of law with the war, okay, and the Russian invasion of Georgia. Ina, I would like to ask you, okay, because you're a documentarist and you're an activist, okay, and also, you know, your comments as well, but I wanted to bring Ina into the discussion. Ina, what did you observe? How have you documented, or how have you, what is your experience with this, with with Russian penetration, and what has happened to Georgia?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, and just would like to express my pain. It's my personal pain to Sophia. It's really my pain. My experience is very bad because I can tell that only one channel who is 100% showing my films wasn't Tavariarchi. And Nika Gvaramia is a person who understands 100% what I'm talking, because I'm talking general, the problem. Not only Putin, not only Ivanishvili, but Russia itself. And you know what I'm telling, and Nika would agree with me. The aggression against Georgia of Russia began not in 2008. It was the second part, but it was just first steps of so-called Russian Federation, Democratic Russian Federation of Boris Yeltsin, because he was the president who started attack Georgia and occupied Abkhazia. It was in 1991. And after that, after liquidation of our first president, Zviadgam Sakhurdia, after that was attack to Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. And Nika Gvaramia was only person who was very, only he shown this movie about independence of Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. You cannot even imagine how it was. He was like a hero that time, because it was before the decision was made, before attack to Ukraine in 2022. And it was, such important, because even Radio Liberty refused to show this movie. I can tell you that there is a very big problem in our world, democratic world, in European Union, this understanding of Russia is aggressor. Because even these so-called Russian liberals doesn't want to accept that Russia is aggressor until February 22. It was taboo telling about this. okay, they are, ready to speak about reforms, about how Navalny will be, perfect president of new Russia, but they never tell about Georgia. 2008 was also taboo. President Mikhail Saakashvili was blamed, and he was, pictured like a very funny figure. Even journalists of Radio Liberty, because I live in Prague and I know very well. It is a kind of cliche that Zviad Gamsahurdia was a nationalist dictator, and this was made by Russian propaganda as well. Even that time, even so-called free media, Yeltsin period did such a propaganda, and Mikhail Saakashvili as well made such a cliche by these journalists of not only Kremlin but also Radio Liberty. It's a shame. It's a shame. They don't want to tell about this. And when I'm, just screaming and shouting about Nika Gvaramia's case, they are telling, but what you are telling, Georgia is free country. What is going on? We don't care what is going on in Georgia. I'm just coming from Brussels, where we had the 5th Forum of Free Nations of Russia. And we are just talking about decolonization, because we see the key problem in Russia as empire. Russia should be decolonized, and after this, Georgia also will be free. Because now I cannot come. I was born in Georgia, in Tbilisi, and I have graves there, my grandfathers and grandmothers. I cannot stay there because I feel myself like in Krasnodar today. It's occupied by Russians, not only literature, like 20% of my country is occupied by Russia.
Yeah.
Itself, Tbilisi is occupied by coming, with Russians. Good Russians and bad Russians, doesn't matter. They are all aggressors, and they doesn't understand what Georgia is, what culture is. They just came as invaders and feel themselves very, very freely there. So what I can tell you, I made an interview with Mikhail Saakashvili in September 2021. We have been in Poland together with Nathalie Vogel. And we met Mikhail Saakashvili there. It was just last days of his being in Europe. And after that, he went back to Georgia, and it then started such a tragedy. And in this interview, I made an interview with him, and he told this that Nika Gvaramia today is a key person of real Georgian, And I'm very proud that these words that Sophia was today read, these words of Nika Gvaramia, it's from my documentary. For me, it's really proud.
It was you. I didn't know that. Sorry, because when I saw this interview, there was no. Yes.
Yes, because I asked Nino Nakashidze to record him, because I would like to ask him to tell something to Russians, them to make understand what they are doing. But until now, even after war against Ukraine, I cannot express this very simple thing to Russians. I cannot. They don't understand. This is a very big problem. And we are doing things with Anna Fatiga, for example. I can, mention this name because she's the greatest woman. She's member of European Parliament. She's always telling name of Nika Gvaramia. And Mikhail Saakashvili also Nika Gvaramia, and we made many interviews with her. And several days ago, she also mentioned Nika Gvaramia in front of members of parliament. And I'm really hope that people in institutions, organize, some foundations in the United States, in Europe, will understand this problem, that this is only problem for all the world, the Russian Empire, and we cannot reform the Russian Empire because it's already from 1991 until now, Russia kills. Russia is killing, and we cannot stop Russia to kill. We can only, work to decolonize Russia. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we will keep doing this because this is extremely important. Nathalie, we've been talking about the importance for Georgia, okay, as a state, that Nika is released, pardoned, whatever it takes to get him out. Why is this case, right, for us who live in Europe, why is this case important also for us?
That's the $1 billion question, $1 billion question. Basically, and it has been mentioned by Nika's lawyer, Tamta, we are in the presence of a captured state. And as you know, my job is to monitor such phenomena. And I keep an eye on hostile operations going on in Europe on various turfs, and specifically the issue of penetration of sovereign states by hostile entities. Now, Georgia, as such, is a textbook case for the next generations to come of a successful hybrid operation. Nika is the victim of this hybrid operation. Because let's be clear about one thing, we are in the presence of not only a successful Russian operation of influence, but it's been also led by what is actually a Russian national. Bitina Ivanishvili had a Russian, is a Russian national. So basically, this is an attack on Georgia from the Russian Federation, which has been successful because he managed a total capture of the state, a total penetration of all pillars. We have seen the explanation here with Tamta, which is very crystal clear. Legislative not working, Georgian Dream has made a farce out of the parliament. I don't see the difference between the Duma and the Georgian parliament, honestly. Then the judiciary is busy using lawfare to prosecute the opposition. And I know that you know that very well, because we were busy last year raising attention on the case of Georgi Kalandadze, who had been the victim of such an operation by the Georgian state. By the way, I suggest that anyone who is interested in having a clear assessment of the erosion of the rule of law in Georgia reads the decision by the court that dismissed the request for an arrest of Georgi Kalandadze. There is an entire page that explains that Georgia is basically a failed state and there is no functioning rule of law. And this is why in no way he would be sent back to Georgia and kept arrested. So we have the issue of lawfare, and Tamta explained that very well. Not only domestically, they are threatening the opposition at home, they are also conveying the message, you are not safe anywhere. We can get you anywhere. We are going to use Interpol with fake red notice or bilateral arrest warrant. We are going to get you. So it's a form of intimidation that we know from Russia. And basically, Bitina Ivanishvili has been using all the KGB tricks and tactics that we know. He is, of course, no longer in power, allegedly, but he's still pulling the strings.
Behind the scenes.
Yes, and so we judiciary not working, legislative not working, the executive. I know we are hoping that Salome, who is originally a French citizen, will wake up and to the case and realize that the entire European Union is looking at her. Because if ultimately Nika Gvaramia is not pardoned, it is her decision. Yeah. Yes, this is the state of Georgia. I will not dwell on the penetration of the military by Russian intelligence. And I won't even mention the fact that Georgian intelligence is actually Russian intelligence. Here we are, a country that is completely in the hands of Russian influence. Mm-hmm. And why does it matter? Well, because our freedom is not only defended in Ukraine by the Ukrainians, it's also defended in Georgia, because if Georgia completely falls, we are doomed. We are doomed.
Yeah. In fact, I was going to ask what the effect is, for the rest, either in terms of security, for the rest of the European Union, if this continues, because this is Georgia geopolitically is in a very important position, no?
Right. I mean, they are practically in power. The question is the next step of penetration would be using Georgia as a proxy in the security area. And that, I can tell you, the day we have to deal with Georgian security services attacking our interests, we are not going to find that very entertaining. It is a mistake to believe that Georgian intelligence is not conducting operations. It is also a mistake to believe that if they are completely penetrated by Russian intelligence, they will just remain and deal with their interior Georgian business.
Yeah, no.
They are going to attack us as well and our interests.
So, sure, because there are diplomats, there are people that they send, businessmen all over Europe, under the name of, let's say, right, we know that they've been penetrated, but they gather intelligence, they make connections.
I'll give you a concrete example.
Yeah.
We had a Georgian national liquidated on German soil, the case of Liluashvili.
Yeah.
I have not heard one statement from the Georgian embassy in Berlin, taking the stand for this Georgian national that was being insulted post-mortem by Russian disinformation, smeared as a terrorist. Then they were implying that he was not really Georgian, like saying basically the Chists are not Georgians or they are lesser Georgians. It would have been the job of a Georgian diplomat to stand up and say, this is a Georgian national and he has been killed by a Russian. Total silence from the side of the foreign ministry, total silence from the embassy in Berlin. It is a shame, and it shows how penetrated even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, especially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Okay.
May I also intervene here? You mentioned, Monique, diplomats. Actually, one of the biggest cases that Nika exposed is a massive surveillance case from Georgian State Security Services. When a whistleblower that Nika got in touch with and interviewed, and we got the files, secret files, Nika exposed the massive surveillance case when state security was surveilling illegally against the whole nation, including the diplomats. And that has been a massive case. It has been reflected in US State Department report, in the EU institutions, high-profile documents, including resolutions. So you don't need to take a guess where this information, when they're surveilling diplomats, is going to Russia, obviously. And speaking of the importance of Georgia besides the geopolitical location, I mean, in the context of Ukraine and the cases that we have exposed, like sanctioned oils and using airspace and the roads of Georgia, Georgia is becoming, if it's not already 100%, a black hole So in these contexts, of course, it's important to keep Georgia. And again, the only surviving pillar of democracy is media, the few small TV channels. Tavares is the main one in terms of influence and popularity. And Nika is the main figure, the only outspoken opinion maker, influential one that people listen to. And he has been isolated on a very critical moment for Georgia and for the country
and for Europe
during the
and for Europe. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we win in Ukraine and then Georgia loses. Do you see what I mean? It's really all it's all interconnected. Otherwise, there is no security. At least this is my view, in things. Because as you were saying, here in Italy, how many of people that are coming in, either Russian assets, businessmen, influence. I'm sure that in Georgia now, during the war, the war has been going on for quite a few years, but there's been, especially after February the 24th, there must have been also a huge influx of Russians into Georgia.
Yes.
That you've had to deal with.
Yes. There's so many Russians coming to as if trying to have a safe shelter, but the incoming of those nationals are absolutely uncontrollable. We have interviewed many people on the border that have been saying that this customs officers just put stamps like without any questions, and it's noteworthy to mention that really outspoken critical journalists, for example, journalists of Medusa, the Medusa that has been announced as an agent, they haven't been allowed to enter Georgia. So it's quite noteworthy to underline that there is a list of specific people, assumingly that Georgian government has from Russia, that that certain Russian nationals should not come here. Some Ukrainian journalists have not been allowed to come and enter the country. And there's a lot of Russian companies that have been opened by Russians now, and they're using some Russian nationals. So when we're saying that Georgia is helping Russia to avoid sanctions, there is this financial aspect of those sanctions that Georgia has actually really joined, because Georgia is part of this SWIFT system, and indeed the Georgian National Bank has implemented those rules, and there are certain restrictions. However, with the help of Georgians, and I guess with the support of Georgian government, Russians still managed to avoid those financial sanctions. For example, they opened the Georgian companies, the registered companies. They use a Georgian name as the CEO of the company, and they're allowed to transfer money. And there is quite an intensive report by Transparency International Georgia that have documented and provide the data how the economic dependency on Russia has increased from 2012, and especially after the war, and how export has been increased, how import from Russia it has been increased, and how many companies have been registered by Russian nationals in Georgia. So these figures tell you that even the financial sanctions that we have joined are not working.
They've managed to skirt and move around them. My, this is an incredible information, everything that you're telling us, about the state of Georgia, also the repercussions for Europe, and then about Nika, himself. How is he doing? How is he doing, Sophia?
Thank you for asking that, Monique. Thank you. Fortunately for his family, for his friends, and for people who respect and love him, he's fine. His physical and psychological health is good, thanks God. There is only one change in his ID number, I would say. He's in prison cell number 212, and this is a part of his identity now. Thank you.
Because Tamta, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think we have outlined the Nika's role, and it's especially in this context. I think I'm not exaggerating, and I'm not being humble, but Nika's role indeed is critical, and that is why EU has included his case in the 12 recommendations. There is no European future if Nika is in prison.
Yeah.
This is not exact. It's there. It's documented. This is what our country's the most largest ally has told us. It's written. It's there. So as Sophia mentioned, this voices internationally is very important. There's one thing, we don't think that Georgian Dream is going to do anything positive. They actually want to say to Georgian people, say that, see, we're doing great, but European Union doesn't want us. And they are not going to implement those 12 recommendations, and they will say to Georgian people that, Europe doesn't want us. And actually their narrative is that Europe wants to drag us to the war. They want to open the second front here. And this is actually these words have been complemented by Lavrov recently, and they have been praising Georgian government. So again, the only hope right now is Georgian president. So if there is anyone who can make their voice heard to Georgian president, would be very helpful for us.
Yeah, just thinking about other people that I've talked to in other countries as well, in Ukraine, this is really about this winning, and also for Nika, and the let's say pursuit of justice, the pursuit of the rule of law, all of these things, all of these values are really for future generations, for ourselves right now. But we have there's a certain lifespan, but it's our children that go forward. It's the children's children that go forward. And what do we leave them with? Just empty values, or do they stand for something? Ina, I wanted to know your opinion on this. What is your wish now, for, let's say, in the next little while, for Nika? Can what are your closing words?
Can I present you one quote of Nika Gvaramia? He presented to our forum of Free Nations of Russia, post-Russia. Because the first forum was in Warsaw, and there was very, very, great Polish journalist. He is really, understand what Russia is. And I told to him, what Nika told to me during this interview, my wish, of course, it's that our neighbor is great ocean. This journalist, his name is Mariusz Pilis. He told us, this is the best. Who told us? It's Nika Gvaramia told this quote. Can I tell this just everywhere? And he's told it's Nasha Mria, like Ukrainians say, Nasha Mria. That's my Mria also is that Russian Federation doesn't exist anymore. So all nations are free. Because this is, of course, for Georgia as well. Georgia should be free. Georgia should be sovereign and to take back the occupied territories. So Abkhazia and Samachablo should be back to Georgia, and Georgia should be free European country. So this is my wish, of course.
Okay, our wish, of course, is to see Nika, pardoned and out, and back to doing his job of being a watchdog and bringing all of the stories that he did on his show, to bringing out his investigations. And I know that that's a very difficult thing to do because it's bringing that information out is there, Sophia. But we will keep on talking about Nika, It's here. Scott, Nathalie, your last words before we close up?
Thank you. Just thank you. It's an inspiration to hear all of you, because I know that there are many dark times over these past years, and for not just Nika to hold up a light, but for you to hold up your own lights, not just because of him, but because of what you bring alongside him and working with him. And that light gives us a bit of hope, even through all that is being endured in Georgia and Ukraine and elsewhere. So just from the bottom of my heart, thank you very, very much.
Nathalie?
We will win.
Yes.
That's wonderful. So I'd like to thank you Okay, we will be in contact. Okay, Sophia, Tamta, we have our contact information. Ina as well. You've all been a great inspiration, I think Scott said. Okay, and also Nathalie said the best. Okay, I think so. Keep strong, Sophia. Sophia.
Thank you. I'm trying.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, really.
Thank you for telling us all about this. Thank you very much. We will be back with Eurofile at some point. We're busy. Scott and I are doing different investigations and different things, but we do take the opportunity every once in a while when we have a fantastic story to tell and a battle to fight. So this is Eurofile. Thank you to everyone.